Hola, bem-vindos y welcome a todos los que nos acompañáis en la última jornada de EnlightED Hybrid Edition 2021, la conferencia mundial más importante sobre educación, tecnología e innovación. Durante estos 2 días hemos respondido a cuestiones fundamentales, preguntas y retos, hemos asistido a una verdadera celebración del conocimiento. Hemos tenido la oportunidad de escuchar a los mejores, pero aún no hemos terminado. Hemos llegado al último capítulo de esta edición, Closing the Gaps, donde abordaremos la tercera brecha educativa, la digital. ¿Cómo podemos afrontar la brecha digital y promover un cambio positivo en la sociedad? Y un día más, lo haremos con los que más saben, con expertos de la talla de Howard Gardner, Kiran Bisetti, Vincent Cerf y Daniel Goleman, entre otros. It's time to start experiencing many exciting moments. From learning how to write our first lines of code with Hadri Patrovi to attending the much-awaited EnlightED Awards ceremony. Not to mention that this year we will have brand new award winners. In addition to the best startups in education, we will also recognize the best practices in educational innovation. Are you ready? Welcome to the third and final day of EnlightED. Time to kick off with the first conversation of the day. Meet Kiran Bisetti, founder of Design for Change, and Howard Gardner, researcher and professor at Harvard University. Kiran Bisetti, educadora finalista del Global Teacher Prize 2019, promueve la innovación educativa a través del empoderamiento social en su organización sin ánimo de lucro Design for Change, fundada en 2009 y presente en 70 países. Howard Gardner es líder en el pensamiento sobre educación y desarrollo humano y es conocido en el ámbito científico por su teoría de las inteligencias múltiples. Modera la conversación Pablo Gonzalo, responsable global de área de comunicación digital de Espacio Fundación Telefónica. Howard, Kiran, and Pablo, welcome to EnlightED 2021.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your presentation. And as Julia said, I have the pleasure to present 2 great titans, thinkers, and reformists in the field of education, Howard Gardner and Kiran Bisetti. I'm sure many of you already know Howard Gardner and his work. He's an American psychologist and author, best known for his theory of multiple intelligences that he first presented in 1983. It's very hard, really, to find any other theory with so much impact and influence in education. It has affected many school improvement efforts all over the world, helping to understand diverse student capacities and emphasizing the need for personalized educational environments, just to give 2 examples. He was a studious child who loved to read, and he developed also into a gifted pianist. He retained a lifelong passion for music that one might think may have contributed to his non-unitary conception of human cognitive capacity. Thank you very much, Mr. Garner, for joining us today.
Thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And our second guest is Kiran Bisetti. She's an Indian designer, education reformer, and a true social entrepreneur. She holds a degree in visual communication from the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. I don't know if I pronounce it well, Kiran, where she lives. And she began her career in a field very different from education, designing restaurants, and later writing for newspapers, for example. But she had always been interested in design thinking and designing experience. And I remember very vividly the story of how she got involved in education, because a dear friend of both and a passionate and activist for education, Alfredo Hernando, told me about this story. When her children started going to school, Kiran was dismayed by the unfriendly and rigid atmosphere that they were experiencing there. So she decided to set up herself a different school, the Riverside School in Ahmedabad. And this school eventually evolved into Design for Change, which is today the largest movement of change worldwide, made for children, and more importantly, made also by children. So Kiran, it's a real pleasure, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, and namaste to all of you.
Thank you, Kiran. So just to continue and to give the floor to Kiran and Howard, I just wanted to say that we're going to discuss right now about education and technology in a very changing world. And I just want to give the floor very quickly, but let me begin with the introduction with a very short and true story that I think is very nice and beautiful. It's the story of Julius Yego, which is an athlete from Kenya. And he competes in javelin. He is a world champion and an Olympic champion as well, an Olympic medalist. He started throwing sticks in a small village in Kenya, where he grew in his parents' farm with no electricity, no cars, no roads. He liked javelin so much, so when he went to school, he wanted to continue. But he had no training, no coach, no nothing. So one day he decided, well, I'm going to go to the internet cafe and watch the best athletes in the world, the best javelin athletes, in YouTube. So I'm going to learn from them, and the next day she would go and practice on his own the things that he had learned in YouTube. That's how he kept winning competition, training, and eventually was able to find a real coach and became Olympic champion. But what struck me the most of this story is when Julius recalled this story, he doesn't highlight technology or YouTube. He says, and I quote, "Education is so important, and education gave me the mind to think on self-training." So I wanted to start with this idea, but really I can't wait to hear our two guests today. So please, the floor is yours, Kiran, to lead the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pablo. And Howard, are we ready for our 30 minutes? I am delighted to again have this opportunity to have a conversation, or I like to call it canversation with Howard. So it's going to be just an unstructured, freewheeling set of questions that I've curated and created just because everybody who I spoke to said, oh, that's the question I would like to ask Howard. So ready for the first one? Okay.
Yes.
So, yes. Okay, I'm going to start really with, I know you were kind of saying, let's not talk too much about COVID, but I just want to reference and frame the first question around this time in history. So in 2005, your book, The 5 Minds for the Future, talked about the 5 minds, right? The discipline, synthesizing, respectful, ethical, and creating minds. Now, 2021. Okay, so we got 15 years since. Given this moment of unprecedented change, do you see the need for a new mind, maybe like the resilient mind that can help us navigate, change and uncertainty? Is that the need of the hour, considering the amount of data we have received about children who are unable to manage and navigate uncertainty? Your thoughts, Mr. Gardner?
Okay, well, that's a good question, Kiran, and it actually highlights the strengths and the weaknesses of the work that I do. Most of my work comes out of studies of cognition, thinking, reasoning, problem solving, creating, synthesizing, and it has involved a stretch for me to talk about respectful and ethics, because that isn't simply cognitive. It involves, the understanding and treatment of other people. And now, when you talk about resilience, I would say that is neither a cognitive thing nor an aspect of relating to other people. It's actually a personality trait, rather like emotional soundness. And I certainly think resilience is tremendously important. And my own feeling, I would be interested in what you think, is that this hasn't been a good time for resilience for any of us. But that would require a kind of expertise in thinking about human beings, which is a little bit outside of my frame of reference. What I will say, which I think will be immediately understood by people, is that one of my nervousnesses about social and emotional learning, which is a buzzword everywhere, is it can be very selfish. You can be socially clever, like the leaders of our two countries a few years ago, but you may use that in a very abusive kind of way. And unless social and emotional skills are tied to caring about others rather than just being effective in the marketplace, I'm not particularly in favor of them. And as you know, the big shift in my thinking about multiple intelligences is how we use those intelligences. I mean, you can use interpersonal intelligence to enhance cooperation, or you can use it to foment trouble and hatred. And intrapersonal intelligence, it's helpful if you can be more resilient, but there's certain people, like the ones who don't take the vaccines, I wish they were less resilient. So this is a long-winded way of saying that every scholar comes out of an intellectual tradition, and while things can be very important, like having a good diet, that's nothing that I have anything particular to say about. You need to go to a nutritionist for that.
And I think I'm totally with you on this idea of the buzzword of, the social emotional well-being. It's kind of taken out of context, or it's seen as a good band-aid solution for everything that we are probably currently facing. I do know a lot of the children that I have met or I have encountering have this deep sense of fear. They've been seeing and they've been observing a world where fear has been the overriding sentiment. And I find that they're ill-equipped right now to be able to manage the shifts in the way they are understanding the world. And therefore, I was curious to know that whilst we've done so much of effort in figuring out a mind that navigates content and information, and you have creativity, but possibly there is the need for bringing resilience and grit as a key factor back into schools. Possibly that's the way one might need to kind of return into getting our children to understand the next big crisis that will happen, right?
Well, let me toss that question back to you, because children do not show up at any school, including the Riverside School, without having a register of resilience. And I have 5 grandchildren, and watching their parents with them, 3 different sets of parents, it's completely obvious that in some of the households, the parents are very overprotective, overcautious, and in others, if the child falls, even if the child falls and hurts himself, it's a good thing, not a bad thing. And so I'm sure you find that same continuum of resilience as opposed to, shall we say, fearfulness. And I was raised as a very fearful child because my one brother had died in a freak accident. So I didn't get into a bicycle until I was 20. That's quite unusual in the United States. So how do you deal as a teacher and as a head of school with kids who come equipped with, let's say, hyper resilience and absolutely no resilience at all because they're fearful about making a faux pas, a false step?
Yeah, you're absolutely right on the fact that they do come to you already with some sort of a core, right? And they've got some experience in the fall or the safety net or the fact that they can take the next step. And I believe that going forward, it's just to be able to identify and figure out where they need to be having a safety net and where they need to just be kind of left loose to say, this is the next step you take, and we're going to always be there. I like the analogy of the trapeze artist in a circus. I often find that a useful analogy when I look at this fascinating fearlessness that they have, but always knowing that they do have a safety net when they started off. But the ability to do these wonderful trapeze acts comes from such a sense of faith. You let go, knowing somebody else will catch you, and you have that trust. that's a marvelous way to kind of take that next step into the world. So yes, so resilience is something. Yeah, you were saying.
That's a very effective stimulus for me, because I was very fearful about physical things, but I was fearless about intellectual things. And maybe the question would have been, can I loosen the fearfulness screw and let it borrow some energy from the part of me which was less fearful? And I think probably teachers should not make the mistake that I made of assuming that if you're fearfulness in one area, you're going to be fearful across the board. It can be quite varied. And I think your good point is you build on those areas where somebody is not so fearful, and you hope that they can generalize that or expand it or pluralize it or whatever.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to pivot into the next question. And I've been always curious about this with the good work that the 3 E's that you talk about as the DNA. So the reason I ask about the good work, the ethics, excellence, and engagement is in referencing elite athletes, especially in individual sport. And I'm going to use my dear husband, Geet Sethi, for all of you who are listening. He is a 9-time world billiards champion. So I wanted to understand a little bit about the 3 E's in context of good work and practice. So Geet, if you look at ethics, well, he's never cheated in the game, and he's been always, true to the craft. So ethics, we tick that box. He loves the sport. So there's deep engagement in what he does. And he pursued excellence through all those 35 years. And I was also looking at, elite boxers who have this individual kind of ability to craft the 4 E's. So I wanted to understand, is that a good work? And is good work sometimes independent of empathy, or is empathy a prerequisite for good work? What are your thoughts of looking at good work as an elite athlete? Does empathy play any role in this? Just curious, because I have been with this gentleman for the last 35 years, and I've seen that there was this detachment and this requirement to be away from others to pursue his good work.
Yeah. Well, I have a definite answer to that. When it comes to excellence, the world will tell him whether he's continuing to be a champion billiard player. Nobody else has to weigh in. Engagement, I'm sure at certain times he's gotten bored with it for whatever reason, or wants to do something else, run a school, publish a book. And, we need to find ways to re-energize us. Nobody finds their work only energizing 24 hours a day. We and I were talking about this before the program began. I think the issue for ethics is a much broader one, because, and I'm going to use 2 different examples, one from boxing and one from myself. As you grow older and maybe not even so good at your craft anymore, the world makes more demands on you in terms of what's the right thing to do. And they're now, I've been actually watching it to my surprise, a 4-part television series in the United States about Muhammad Ali, who became the world's greatest boxer when he was barely out of diapers. But increasingly, he began to speak to the world. And at the end of episode 2 last night, he's in fighting with everybody in the United States because he's become a black Muslim. And episodes 3 or 4 are going to say, how did he become beloved by the world? I just became involved in a very unpleasant situation, and it's not the first one. And whether I speak out and how I speak out is much, much more important now than 20 or 30 years ago. And I wrestle with this, and I talk with my group. I'm going to talk with them right after this program is over about, excuse me, what's the right thing to do? Because it's very erroneous to think you always know yourself. But what we talk about, and you may remember this, is when you talk about good work, there's rings of responsibility. When you're young, you're responsible to yourself and your family, and then to your neighborhood, and then to your job, and then maybe to your profession, and maybe to the wider world. Now, you are an anomaly because you became responsible to the wider world at a much younger age. I mean, nobody else I can think of would bring thousands of kids to Rome on the eve of a pandemic to meet with the Pope and to say, yes, I can. But I guess what I'm saying, excellence, you don't need me. Engagement, that speaks for itself. But to behave ethically and responsibly, that's a huge endeavor. And of course, it's become extremely difficult in the COVID era because anybody who claims they know what to do is just fooling themselves. It's a question of putting very well-informed and not having a stake in the outcome people together. And I devour a lot of newspapers every day. And in the United States, we have experts, but they don't all agree. And then to figure out what is the right thing to do. Should we be giving our vaccines to the world? Should we let China give it to India? How about old people like me? Should we be let to go so we can do the young people? And there's no right answer, but you can be sure your answer will be wrong if you just think you know it. So the summary of what I just said over 5 minutes is the demands on ethical behavior increase as long as you're mentally and physically sound.
So you're saying between the three, between ethics, excellence, and engagement, it's ethics that will finally be the testing ground for us. So while excellence is a more public, sort of peer-reviewed idea, we've got engagement that will vary and keep waning and up and down depending on your state of mind and skill set. You're saying ethics is that's that one thing that is going to keep you exercising the choices and exercising your voice at the right time grows with the responsibility.
That's right. I mean, if you live as a hermit, then your ethics is pretty modest. You probably shouldn't do things to hurt the environment, and you shouldn't get close to people if you have a disease. But if you're a hermit, you won't. But you and I and Geet live in the world, and so we have responsibilities which go well beyond our own tent. And anybody who's an educator, by definition, has responsibility for many colleagues and young people and their families.
But then, Howard, why is it so difficult to do the right thing? I mean, I remember when somebody once commented on Gandhiji, and he kind of said that a man who has nothing to lose is a very dangerous person. And very often it is the idea of, and also think about the act of role modeling. When you mention leaders of the world, is it the lack of role models that gets us to navigate our moral compass and to kind of correct us when we are drifting? Is role models a good way to get us back on track when we are sometimes questioning to do what is right over what is easy? I mean, how does one constantly recalibrate your compass?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I haven't thought about in the way you described it. But of course, you need role models, and it's easier if they're alive. But we use the word paragon for. I mean, I've never met Gandhi. You never met Gandhi, but he can be a paragon. But any saint has flaws. One of the wonderful things about Gandhi, he castigated himself before anybody else did. He was the first to blame himself. But I like the idea of having a variety of mentors, a large rainbow of mentors, and taking certain aspects from one and certain aspects from others, and realize that, for example, once we are in a digital era where it's easier to pass falsehoods than it is to pass truths, or they circulate more readily, then a lot of people who lived in the pre-social media, pre-digital era cannot be good role models. I mean, we say about Gandhi that he needed the telegraph, because when he went on a fast, if he couldn't have the rest of the world that he was fasting, he would die, because there would be no pressure on the British to succor him. Of course, now, when Princess Diana died, 98% of the world knew about it within a day. And that's just unbelievable. And, we now know that lies as I say, to go very, very quickly. So you can't leave it to your role models. That should shift. I think all of us who think about it now admire some people more than we did and admire other people less. I'll give you an American example. I grew up in a Democratic household, Democratic Party, and people were always very critical of Dwight Eisenhower, Ike. I now think that he was the best president in my lifetime because of all the things he didn't do, like didn't go into Vietnam and kept Britain out of Suez and built interstate highways. And his last speech was about the danger of the military-industrial complex. This is the most important general of the Second World War saying, General Electric and General Motors have too much power. So we should change our own set of heroes and mentors, not lightly, but deliberately. And if you don't, you probably are frozen in a certain time warp. And this is very important for young people because, I don't know the athletes. I don't know the rock singers. I just said to my wife at breakfast, we should go see this play. And she said, why should we see this play? I said, because the grandchildren like it, and we need to know why they like it. So there's a demographical era as well, spectrum as well.
Yeah, I think you span the whole from Bach to Bieber, so you've got the whole spectrum in your music sort of journey. But I think you also mentioned, while you said mentors, I think you also have made a case for tormentors. You said that you should have even a healthy dose of tormentors to constantly look at you and give you that checks and balances, as it were, while you journey on. So do you feel tormentors are equally important when you're looking at your role, your just ethics and the choices you make?
Well, but let me explain tormentors. I didn't decide to have tormentors. They appeared and asserted themselves. But this goes very back to your earlier question. If you're not defeated by tormentors, and it's very sad because some people are, then it makes you more resilient. So when my teacher, the famous Stanley Pilgrim, attacked me publicly and nobody came to my defense, I learned that I have to be able to defend myself. And this ethical issue I'm dealing with now, it's a difficult one because if I go out public, I'm going to be attacked a lot. And at my age, I don't really want to be attacked. I have other things to do. But on the other hand, I don't feel I can just blow it off. When you're 30, it's much easier than when you're 80 to deal with things which stress you and which take your time away. On the other hand, you could say, well, you've had your time. Maybe you should behave ethically completely. And that would be another point of view which I couldn't dismiss out of hand. It's maybe a question of how much resilience you have. It's interesting, there are few Republicans in the United States who are now denouncing Trump, like George W. Bush. They were pretty quiet when it mattered. And I don't admire them for speaking out at this point.
True. No, and just pulling on that same thread, I wanted to ask you regarding the two ways in which we make decisions, the whole idea of neighborly morality and the ethics of the role. And often I've struggled with that. And it's also a cultural thing. And I'm curious to know whether it's a gender thing as well. The idea of constantly allowing second chance and third chance by saying, next time it's okay, and I know your father, and you'll be fine, versus the idea of the ethics of the role that you talk about in terms of organizations. And I want to understand that lots of schools across the world, and specifically in certain cultures, use a framework of the neighborly morality in decision making, whether it's personal accountability or organizational culture. Now, children are seeing that. I've often been told that children might not listen to you, but they'll always mimic you. So in the mimicking, they're seeing us make decisions that often are ethically possibly challenging what should be done, because I'm often using the framework of, next time, and it's okay. So I wanted to understand from you, what are the trade-offs of using that lens by virtue of, specifically in education? And have you ever had that tension in the work you've done to struggle between, I know this person and I maybe can give them a chance, versus no, I happen to be part of, say, Harvard, and I have the role of that. So if you could shed a little bit on this specifically during at times like this.
Sure. Now, that issue I think a great deal about. I think clearly for young children, let's say 10 and under, getting neighborly morality, which can be abbreviated as the Golden Rule or the Ten Commandments in a Western culture. Being kind, don't harm people, those kinds of things. I think that has to be the priority. But a school is also a community, and having visited your school, it's a community embedded in a larger community, and so your responsibilities beyond your neighbors are things which I would hope in Riverside becomes a part of your breathing by the time you become an adolescent, and having met with some of your older children and see the extent to which, I don't mean your biological children, I mean the children at the school. I think they're already having a sense of what I would call the profession and the institution. The institution is the school, the profession is what it means to be a teacher, a leader, and so on. But your school is unusual in that regard. When we talk about the issues more generally, it's always a bad idea when you're dealing with somebody you know well to be the sole decision maker with reference to that person, because you're too likely to err on one side or the other. And that's where it's good to have what Ted Sizer, the educator, called critical friends, people whom you trust but are willing to say, Howard or Kiran, I know you want to be nice to this teacher or this student, but they've had enough chances by now. And unless you draw a line, you're just giving them the wrong message. Or in my case, Howard, this person comes from a different background. They'd never really understood what it meant to present work that was not their own. I think you need to give them a very tough talk, but maybe one more chance, because I tend to be very strict on issues of plagiarism and cheating. And yes, cultures differ a lot. I mean, there's a whole strand of research which I associate with Rick Schwader and his student Jonathan Haidt about how in India there are very different senses of your relationship to your family and to your community and to your religion and to your God than there are in a more Western democratic culture. And it's ridiculous just to overlook this. On the other hand, what things that are happening in China now I find very upsetting, because essentially Chinese history is being rewritten in an almost Maoist, Stalinist way to enable President Xi to do exactly what he wants, even if it's not in the interest of the rest of the world.
No, but then so how do you reconcile to the tension? Have you ever had to say or tell yourself, here is where I'm willing to let go? Have there been, or maybe the better question is, in which areas of your life do you say, I'm willing to kind of look at a second chance, and this is absolutely a no-no? I mean, this will just not pass that cut.
Yeah, I think in cases where I'm very close to people, I really need to have other input because I'm too emotional about it. But, there are certain things which they're non-negotiable. I mean, more than once, unfortunately, I've had to push to get a cheating student out of graduate school at Harvard because I have too many faculty who are apologists, and the notion that someone could get a PhD or an EDD while they plagiarized or cheated, to me, is absolutely unacceptable. They say, well, yeah, maybe if they were 10 or 20, but, the answer is no. And I often say to people, I just had a wonderful person ask me whether she should take a job, and I feel she shouldn't take the job, but I think she's going to take the job. And I said, you need to answer the question, at what time would you quit? And she said, I never thought about that. And what I didn't say, what I was thinking is, if you don't, you're a whore, you're a prostitute, because you're just doing everything. I wouldn't have said that, but I asked the right question. Do you have anything which you wouldn't do in this job? If you don't have a good answer, you do not need that job.
Oh, you're a tough one.
Yeah.
That's
because I esteem this person a great deal. If I didn't care, I probably would have said whatever.
True. Okay, since you are such a prolific writer and you're coming into your, which book, 25th, 30th, which book, what's the number of books you've already written? How many? Have you lost count?
I told my mother, who lived to 102 and died a few years ago, just answer over 30. So there's over 30 books in over 30 languages and over 30 honorary degrees. But at this point, it's best not to say anything about it at all. I mean, I want to be judged by the kind of family person I was, the kind of member and leader of Project Zero, and by whether some ideas that I came forth with stand the test of time. But the numbers don't.
And as my friend, you have to put that onto your the list of accomplishments. My friend. Okay, we've come to the last 5 minutes. I've got two questions for you. One is, like I said, given the vast body of work in 25, you've gone through it. And each of those books have either offered us a new perspective or taught the world and given much food for thought, as I would say. Have you had a chance during this kind of lockdown and had this time off? Have you looked back and kind of seen any book that has required reevaluation? Maybe these learnings that have happened during the pandemic, has it asked you to relook at either some of your observations or evaluations? Said maybe this can be rewritten or rethought. Have you had some sort of a retrospective and seen some of your work?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about this, but I'll try to say it succinctly. First of all, when you get old, you often forget stuff that you've done. And I'm amazed at stuff that crops up again, where it's, did I do that 40 years ago? So that's the first thing. Second of all, Kiran, I'm putting together two books, The Essential Howard Gardner on Mind and The Essential Howard Gardner on Education.
Oh, fun.
Sell them. And there's a chance for me to comment on where I differ, and not to produce stuff I don't feel good about. But as you know, I've been interested in synthesizing for a long time and wrote about it as early as 2005. But I've now become obsessed by it. And like the cobbler who only sees shoes and feet, I look for synthesizing everywhere. I have communication with people everywhere, and it's very nice at my age to have something new, which I don't think has been really investigated systematically by people in my particular field. So that's going to keep me going for a while. You had another question.
No, I'm so glad to say that from your side and you would offer to the world to say, these are my final kind of musings and thoughts that are from my body of work. So yes, I want my autograph copy, please. Thank you very much for that. Okay. So in ending, always a little rapid fire to end with a little bit of a smile on the face, because I think joy was something we really missed a lot. This collective effervescence, which I love, that whole idea of contagion. So, Mr. Gardner, do you have a Zoom shirt?
A Zoom shirt?
Yes. Do you have anything that you wear Zoom sessions?
No. I am pretty sartorially blind. My children and my wife tried to dress me, but this is not the direct question you asked. But every day I play the piano, and other than my family, this is my spiritual endeavor. And whenever it looks like I can't do it anymore, it's a source of sadness. But I have to say that I did do it for 75 years. Seeing my family, my friends, my colleagues, and knowing that most of them are okay, and mourning, MOURNING, the number of senior colleagues who have died is very, very sad, including, you remember, our colleague Kurt Fisher died the last year. If I can end this on a somewhat whimsical note, the famous anthropologist Clifford Geertz said, all sorts of people are dying who never died before. And I won't be around after that, but so I take pleasure in the life and the liveliness of my children, my colleagues, my friends like you. And if I have to depart, I'm glad to know that they will carry on their wonderful personae for a time to come.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And in conclusion, I think it just brings it so beautifully to a lovely quote that Rumi said, a little poem. He said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And I think I think just this year has possibly given a lot of wounds to all of us. And if the light enters and awakens us and kind of guides us, I think it'd be great. And also, this is EnlightED, the session we are speaking at. So I think it kind of comes to a beautiful close. So thank you, Howard, for another wonderful, wonderful conversation, or a conversation, might I say. And I want my autographed copies of the books. And Pablo, over to you. I hope we've been on time, and for me, it's been a fascinating conversation.
Of course, Kiran, thank you very much. For us, it's been really also fascinating conversation. You can tell it's a conversation between two friends, because it's been amazing, not only because of the ideas, but on the flow. You have talked about resilience and fear. You've talked about empathy, but also safety nets. You've talked about the importance of engagement and excellence, but especially of the importance of ethics. A very long time about that. About role models, but also about tormentors, which is very important as well. And also we've learned that we are going to be able to read very soon the essentials of Howard Gardner about the mind, about education, which is very great news. So thank you very much, both, from our hearts. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for joining EnlightED this year.
Thanks, Howard. Big lots of love to Ellen and everybody else.
And let me say,
Bye.
I hope that both of you continue your good work, and the same to the audience for this very comfortable conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.